My parents left me at a gas station and drove off. Maybe now you'll learn not to be a burden. I never went back. 14 years later, they found me and are begging for money. But I have learned to keep the burden away. I, 32M, still remember the exact smell of that gas station. Motor oil mixed with stale coffee and the faint sweetness of spilled soda. It was a Tuesday in August, the kind of day where the heat made everything shimmer. I had just turned 18 2 weeks earlier, fresh out of high school with college acceptance letters burning a hole in my backpack. My parents had been fighting more than usual that summer. Money was tight. Dad had lost his construction job 3 months prior, and Mom was working double shifts at the diner just to keep us afloat. I had been working part-time at a local grocery store, saving every penny for college, but it wasn't enough to ease the tension that had settled over our small apartment like a thick fog. The argument started over something stupid. I had forgotten to take out the trash that morning. But it escalated quickly, the way fights do when people are already stretched thin. Mom accused me of being selfish, of only thinking about myself and my future while they struggled. Dad joined in, his voice getting louder with each word about how ungrateful I was, how I never appreciated what they sacrificed for me. I defended myself, maybe more harshly than I should have. I reminded them that I had been working, that I helped with groceries, that I had gotten good grades and stayed out of trouble. But they were beyond listening. Mom's face was red with frustration, and Dad's hands were clenched at his sides. Then Mom said something that cut deeper than any physical blow could have. She told me I was nothing but a burden, that they had given up their dreams so I could pursue mine, and that I was too selfish to see it. The words hung in the air like smoke, choking all of us. Dad suggested we go for a drive to cool off. I thought it was a good idea. We all needed space to think. I climbed into the back seat of our old Honda, watching the familiar streets of our neighborhood blur past the window. We drove in silence for about 20 minutes before Dad pulled into a gas station I had never seen before. He told me to get out and buy us all sodas from the vending machine near the entrance. I grabbed a $10 bill from my wallet and walked toward the machine, grateful for a moment alone to collect my thoughts. I took my time selecting the drinks, hoping the break would give everyone a chance to calm down. When I turned around with 3 cold Cokes in my hands, the parking space where our car had been was empty. At first, I thought they had moved to a different spot. I walked around the entire gas station, checking every angle, every shadow. But our old Honda was nowhere to be seen. I stood there for 10 minutes, then 20, telling myself they would come back. They had to come back. But deep down, I knew they wouldn't. The gas station attendant, an older man with kind eyes and grease-stained hands, noticed me standing there and asked if I was all right. I told him my parents had driven off, trying to keep my voice steady. He let me use the phone to call home, but no one answered. I tried 3 more times over the next hour, but the ringing just echoed in my ear like a countdown to a reality I wasn't ready to face. The attendant, whose name was Frank, offered to let me stay until closing time. He said he had seen situations like this before, though not often with someone my age. He gave me a sandwich from the store and a bottle of water, refusing to let me pay. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the empty parking lot, Frank asked where I would go. I had saved about $800 for college expenses. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get me started somewhere. I thanked Frank for his kindness and started walking toward the main road, my backpack heavy with everything I owned that mattered. That night, I slept at a 24-hour diner about 2 miles down the road. The waitress, a woman in her 40s with tired eyes and a gentle smile, let me stay in a corner booth as long as I ordered something every few hours. I nursed cups of coffee and picked at pie slices, watching the clock and trying to figure out my next move. Over the next few days, I found a cheap motel that rented rooms by the week. The manager, perhaps sensing my desperation, gave me a discount in exchange for helping with basic maintenance around the property. I called my school guidance counselor and explained my situation. She helped me contact the college I had planned to attend and defer my enrollment for a year. I threw myself into work with a determination that surprised even me. I took any job I could find, washing dishes, stocking shelves, cleaning offices at night. I learned quickly that survival required a different kind of strength than I had ever needed before. Every dollar earned was a step away from that gas station. Every day survived was proof that I could make it on my own. The first year was the hardest. There were nights when I questioned everything, when the loneliness felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. I thought about my parents constantly, where they were, whether they regretted leaving me, if they ever wondered how I was managing. But slowly, that wondering turned into something else. It turned into resolve. I enrolled in community college while working full-time, taking classes at night and on weekends. My grades were excellent. When you have nothing but your own effort to rely on, focus comes naturally. I transferred to a 4-year university after 2 years, majoring in business administration with a focus on finance. During college, I started a small business buying and reselling electronics online. What began as a way to earn extra money for textbooks grew into something much larger. I had a natural ability for identifying undervalued items and marketing them effectively. By my senior year, I was earning more from my business than most of my professors were making in salary. I graduated summa cum laude with 0 debt and $30,000 in savings. More importantly, I had learned something invaluable about myself. I was capable of far more than I had ever imagined. The scared 18-year-old who had been abandoned at a gas station had evolved into someone who understood the value of self-reliance. After graduation, I moved to a larger city and expanded my business. I hired employees, developed relationships with suppliers, and eventually transitioned into real estate investment. Each success felt like another mile between me and that gas station, another layer of protection against ever being vulnerable again. I changed my phone number several times over the years, moved apartments frequently, and kept my personal information private. I had no desire to be found by people who had made it clear I was unwanted. I built a life that was entirely my own, friends who knew nothing of my past, achievements that belonged solely to me, and a sense of security that no one could take away. By the time I turned 30, I owned a small portfolio of rental properties and had started a consulting firm that specialized in helping small businesses optimize their operations. I had more money than I had ever dreamed of as a teenager, but more than that, I had peace. I had learned to enjoy my own company, to trust my own judgment, and to build relationships with people who valued me for who I was rather than what I could provide. Update 1. 14 years after that August day at the gas station, my carefully constructed privacy was shattered by a phone call. I had just finished a meeting with a potential client when my assistant informed me that someone claiming to be my mother was online too. My first instinct was to hang up. I had built my entire adult life around the principle that some doors, once closed, should remain that way. But curiosity got the better of me. I picked up the phone and heard a voice I hadn't heard in over a decade. Mom sounded older, more fragile than I remembered. She told me they had been looking for me for years, that they had hired a private investigator who had finally tracked me down through my business registration records. She said they needed to talk, that there were things I needed to understand about that day. I listened without saying much, letting her words wash over me like rain on a roof, present but not penetrating. She explained that they had driven around the block several times before coming back to the gas station, but I was already gone. She claimed they had searched for me, contacted police, filed missing person reports. None of this rang true to me. I remembered standing in that parking lot for over an hour, visible from the road. I remembered calling home repeatedly with no answer. If they had truly wanted to find me, they could have. But I agreed to meet them. Not because I forgave them or missed them, but because I needed to see what 14 years had done to the people who had abandoned me. I suggested a restaurant in a busy part of town, somewhere public where emotions couldn't escalate too quickly. They looked smaller than I remembered. Dad's hair had gone completely gray, and he walked with a slight limp. Mom had aged in the way that worry ages people, lines around her eyes, a tension in her shoulders that spoke of years of stress. They both stared at me as if they couldn't quite believe I was real. The conversation was awkward, filled with long pauses and careful words. They asked about my life, and I gave them basic information, nothing personal, nothing that revealed how successful I had become. I had learned long ago that information was power, and I wasn't ready to give them any leverage. Then Dad got to the real reason for the meeting. He had been diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's disease 6 months earlier. The medical bills were mounting, his disability payments weren't enough, and they were facing foreclosure on their home. Mom's hours at the diner had been cut, and they were struggling to make ends meet. They needed money. Not a small amount. They were talking about $30,000 to catch up on their mortgage and medical expenses. They looked at me with the same expectation I remembered from childhood, as if my resources naturally belonged to them. I felt nothing. No anger, No sadness, no obligation. Just a calm, cold observation of two people who had taught me that family was conditional, that love came with strings attached, and that I was only valuable when I was useful. I told them I would think about it and left the restaurant. They called after me, pleading for me to understand their situation, to remember that they were family. But I had learned a different definition of family over the past 14 years. Update 2. Over the next few weeks, they contacted me repeatedly. Phone calls, emails, even showing up at my office building. The desperation in their voices grew more pronounced with each interaction. They painted a picture of themselves as victims of circumstance, people who had made mistakes but deserved compassion. I researched their situation. It wasn't hard to verify the details. Public records showed their financial struggles, and Dad's medical condition was real. But I also discovered things they hadn't told me. Dad had been arrested twice for drunk driving in the years after I left. Mom had declared bankruptcy once and had a pattern of maxing out credit cards. Most telling was what I learned from neighbors and old family friends. I reached out to a few people who had known us when I was younger. Their stories painted a picture of parents who had always blamed others for their problems, who had a history of burning bridges and expecting others to rebuild them. Mrs. Henderson, who had lived next door to us for 20 years, told me something that crystallized everything. She said that after I disappeared, my parents had told everyone I had run away because I was selfish and ungrateful. They had portrayed themselves as heartbroken parents abandoned by their child, never mentioning that they had driven off and left me. That conversation removed any lingering doubt I might have had. They hadn't changed. They had simply found themselves in a situation where they needed something from me again. I made my decision. I arranged one final meeting, this time in my office. I wanted them to see what I had built, to understand exactly what they had given up when they chose to abandon me. My office was on the 15th floor of a downtown building, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The space was professionally designed, with awards on the walls and photos of properties I owned. They sat across from my desk, looking uncomfortable in the leather chairs that cost more than they probably made in a month. I let the silence stretch between us for a moment, watching them take in their surroundings. Then I told them about my life. Really told them. I described the first night sleeping in a diner, the months of working multiple jobs just to afford a room in a boarding house. I talked about putting myself through college, building my business from nothing, buying my first property with money I had saved dollar by dollar. I showed them my bank statements. Not because I was bragging, but because I wanted them to understand the magnitude of what they had lost when they decided I was a burden. The numbers on the screen represented more than money. They represented every choice I had made to survive and thrive without them. Their expressions changed as they realized the extent of my success. The entitlement in their eyes shifted to something else, a calculating look that confirmed everything I had suspected about their motivations. Then I gave them my answer. I would not be giving them money. Not $30,000, not $3,000, not $30. I explained that their financial crisis was the result of decades of poor decisions, and that my success was the result of learning not to enable people who refused to take responsibility for their choices. Dad started to argue, his voice rising as he talked about family obligations and moral duties. Mom began to cry, employing the same emotional manipulation tactics I remembered from childhood. But their words bounced off me like rain on a windshield. I had learned something important in those 14 years. Love is not obligation, and blood relation does not create debt. The people who had taught me that I was a burden had no claim on the success I had built by proving them wrong. Update 3. Before they left my office, I gave them something they hadn't asked for, the truth. I told them exactly how their abandonment had affected me, not to hurt them, but to make sure they understood the full scope of their choices. I described the shame of sleeping in public places, the fear of not knowing where my next meal would come from, the way I had learned to trust no one completely, because the people who were supposed to protect me had proven unreliable. I explained how their decision to drive away that day had shaped every relationship I had formed since, every boundary I had established, every success I had achieved. But I also told them about the gifts they had inadvertently given me. Their abandonment had taught me self-reliance in a way that no other experience could have. It had forced me to develop strength I never would have discovered otherwise. It had shown me that I was capable of surviving anything, of building something beautiful from complete devastation. I thanked them, and I meant it. not for their love or support, but for the lesson they had taught me about what I could accomplish when I stopped waiting for others to save me. As they prepared to leave, Mom asked one final question. She wanted to know if there was anything they could do to earn my forgiveness, any way to rebuild the relationship we had lost. I considered the question seriously before answering. I told her that forgiveness was not something they could earn, but something I had already given myself by refusing to carry their choices as my burden. As for rebuilding our relationship, I explained that some things, once broken, reveal that they were never as strong as we thought they were. They left my office that day, and I haven't heard from them since. I don't expect to. 6 months later, I learned through a mutual acquaintance that they had lost their house. Dad's condition had worsened, and they had moved in with Mom's sister in another state. Part of me felt a brief flicker of something, not regret, but a recognition of their humanity and suffering. But that flicker was quickly replaced by something stronger, gratitude for the distance I had maintained. Their crisis would have become my crisis if I had allowed it. Their poor planning would have become my emergency if I had given them the power to make it so. I had learned to keep the burden away, just as they had taught me to do 14 years earlier at a gas station that now felt like it belonged to someone else's story. Today, I run a successful business that employs 12 people. I own properties across 3 cities. I have friends who know they can count on me and who I trust completely. I date someone who appreciates my independence and shares my values about personal responsibility. Most importantly, I have built a life that no one can take away from me because I built it entirely with my own hands. Every success belongs to me. Every failure is my own to learn from. And every choice I make is guided by lessons learned in the hardest classroom of all. Sometimes I drive past gas stations and remember that 18-year-old boy standing with 3 Cokes in his hands, watching his parents drive away. I feel compassion for him now, but not pity. He didn't know it at the time, but that moment was not the end of his story. It was the beginning of the only story that truly mattered. The story he would write himself.